I'm your comic strip critic, and this is the Punchline, version 2.0. I know that that's slightly different from how I usually do things, but I think that the show is going to be a little different from normal from this point on out. And I want to tell you all why. All of the viewers and the fans and the cartoonists deserve to know, and I also think it's important in the context of what this episode is going to be about. When I first started this show, in April of 2012, I was simply doing the same thing as many of the other critics that I looked up to and admired, finding things that I didn't enjoy and tearing them down and making fun of them. After all, if it worked for the nostalgia critic with movies, then why couldn't it work for me? But the more that I looked deeper and deeper into short-form comics, my chosen medium, and the more I began to understand how they worked, the more I understood just how differently they are when you're reviewing them. You see, a negative review of a movie, or a TV show, or a video game might be entertaining for you to watch, but it also serves a practical purpose. It lets you know if your hard-earned money and time is worth investing into a particular product. That's not necessarily the same case with comic strips though, because any comic that you might be interested in checking out can be done so for free with the very same smartphone or computer that you're using to watch this video. So doing a solely negative review of a comic, I feel serves little purpose. You're not going to want to go check out a comic. I had to sit through something that I didn't enjoy, and ultimately nobody benefits from that situation. I want to change that. From now on, when I find a comic that I don't like here on the show, I not only want to talk about why I don't like it, but ways that I see to improve it. If the cartoonist involved wants to use some of those ideas, great! By all means, go nuts, use them! If they'd rather not, I understand that too, but I still feel that at least the video would be more informative and entertaining, rather than just listening to me whine and complain and grumble for 10 minutes. Which at long last leads us to the subject of today's episode. And folks, I'm not gonna lie, this is the most nervous I have ever been on this show, because I am going to talk about the flaws that I see in a comic today, knowing full well that two of the creators behind that comic are followers of mine on Twitter. Can you understand if I'm a little nervous here? With all that said, let's talk about BC. Oh, BC. I first reviewed this comic back in mid-2012, and I've had quite some time to think about what could be done with this comic, the same way I did with Beetle Bailey last year. In a sense, I'm reminded a lot of Beetle Bailey when reading BC, because I see so much potential being left by the wayside in this comic. In fact, I see a lot more potential being squandered by BC than by Beetle Bailey. We've got an ill and infirm comic to diagnose and treat here on the Punchline today, so let's get to work. Is the doctor in the house?
I'm the doctor.
No, not you. Sit back down, you're okay. I'm talking about the comic strip doctor. Doc, what's the problem with this comic and what can we do about it? Well, critic, the problem with this one is fairly simple and straightforward and easy to diagnose. I've seen it in here all the time. There are two major things to have a look at: the characters and the setting. Let's take a look at the characters first. I read and analyze the comics pages more than anyone else I know, but for the life of me, I can't actually name any of these characters. Well, I know there's one called Thor, one called Pete, one whose name actually is BC, but I can't tell which one is which. And that's because so many of the characters look almost exactly alike, and none of them act differently from one another in any noticeable way. Look at these character designs. Every single one of them has the exact same outfit and very little difference in body shape or style. Only the hair is different. The only real difference in the cast is Wiley, whose name I had to look up to remember. He has a peg leg, a slightly shredded outfit, and a differently styled beard. And of course there's Grog, because he has a short, stumpy, hairy body with a massive nose. He's easily the best designed character of the entire cast. Quick question though. Besides Grog, how many of you noticed those differences in characters before I pointed them out? Here's a quick simple test of character design. This is the cast of BC. Take a look at them and memorize their names. Alright then. Now, name these characters for me. Alright, now these characters. Alright, now then, who's who in this lineup? Besides him. Are you starting to see the issue I'm talking about with the character design? That's not the only problem with the characters, though. Personality-wise, there's nothing that makes any of them unique. I can't really explain it any better than that. Cooper is a lazy prankster. Jason is the epitome of the geek stereotype. Marigold is vain and proud, but also fun-loving and whimsical. Wiley is... I can't think of anything. None of the characters have any personality traits that make them stand out, despite what the biographies on the website say. I don't see any evidence in the comic strip to support that. So the characters are one major flaw of BC, but I think that the key to fixing that lies in the other major problem with the strip: the setting. BC takes place in a barren landscape, with no greenery, few trees, and little to speak of to draw the eye visually. Take a look at this specific comic. Our red-headed caveman, which one is this again? Right. BC walks out from a cave on the right, checks the thermometer, and then appears to walk back to the right to the Bear Hibernation Preserve. In actuality, he's walking from his house at location A to the thermometer at location B, and then to the preserve at location C. Well, I presume he is anyway, but in panels 1 and 3, all of the buildings are on the right side of the panel and have the exact same design and color, so it looks like BC is walking out from and back to the Hibernation Preserve. Varying the landscape or design of the buildings, such as a tiny cave or a large cave, would add visual interest and make the strip easier to understand and follow. And that design philosophy would benefit the strip as a whole. So then, those are the two major shortcomings that we have to treat: our characters and our setting. I've done my diagnosis. Critic, the rest of this is yours. Alright, thank you, Doctor. So then, now that the problems with our comic strip have been identified, how do we go about making our caveman evolve to the next level? BC obviously stands for Before Christ, taking place in a period of time when even the Flintstones seems like a science fiction setting. Roasting meat on a spit is about the most high-tech that the cast of BC gets. This is the dawn of man, civilization before it's even called civilization. Now imagine that story. The story of a group of people starting civilization. Everyone's got a different job to perform in the new world. One person learns to hunt, one person learns to build, one person studies philosophy, and they all work together to create the government that we know and love today.
This is madness.
This is politics.
Okay, maybe they can do better than we did. Still though, I think the idea of a story about the birth of mankind is a really, really interesting idea. You could get a whole lot of humor and social commentary, if that's something you wanted to do, from exploring a new idea and then seeing it either succeed or crash and burn. It's a sort of sociological and political Wile E. Coyote, if you want to think of it that way. How does that idea sound? Alright then, option number 2. This is a much, much deeper rabbit hole to explore, but I think it's the much more interesting option. Hear me out. BC. Before Christ. Ancient prehistoric times. This much about the comic is obvious, right? Well, then why is the Bible quoted so often? Why is John Boehner referenced thousands of years before he was even born? Why do baseball and golf and texting while driving gags exist? Well, maybe it's because BC does not take place in the distant past, but instead the distant future. When your comic is literally called Before Christ, but Christ is being quoted thousands of years before his birth, maybe BC actually stands for Beyond Christ. And now we can get into some really, really interesting ideas. Imagine if the character of BC is redesigned as an intrepid explorer. Give him a walking stick and a primitive backpack for a unique visual look. Now our new BC is walking around and happens to run across a decaying, moss-covered Washington monument. Our world has crumbled. leaving our distant descendants as primitive cavemen again. And now we get to watch the characters mess with our technology and misunderstand it the way the Beverly Hillbillies would have done. Maybe as they explore other buildings, they find ancient mythological texts like the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and 50 Shades of Grey.
One of these things just doesn't belong here.
This way, the characters have a perfect way to continue quoting the Founding Fathers and Jesus Christ when necessary. Heck, go on and give our scholar character some ancient Roman robes for his design. That also helps to identify his personality a bit too. With either way we take our reimagined comic strip, either before Christ or beyond Christ, we have a whole lot of overlapping ideas in play here. Whether we're trying to make a new invention or understand how one of our inventions used to work, we have the opportunity there for a whole lot of physical comedy and slapstick humor. And whether we're trying to create a new government or talking about how the old government used to work, there's the chance there for a whole lot of philosophical discussions and political commentary. And trust me, those can both be used to make a very, very successful and popular comic. With either approach, we also have the opportunity for some very, very engaging and very, very interesting storylines, which I feel are hugely important. One of my colleagues over at Reviewers Unknown wants to argue that not every comic needs to have storylines to function. I suppose there's a certain amount of truth to that. Single panel comics like The Far Side and Family Circus don't have storylines, and they function perfectly fine. But for multiple panel comic strips, I feel it's absolutely 100% necessary to not just run gag-a-day strips, but also to run storylines. They are perfect for developing character personalities, exploring ideas and themes, and drawing readers back to see what happens next. I cannot tell you how many times the comments on Retail's website speculate on story details and say, I can't wait to see what happens next. It creates a sense of tension, a reward for long-term readers, and some real emotional investment. Using only gag-a-day strips means that your comic will be relegated to hundreds, if not thousands, of throwaway strips that have no real memorable standout events. It's because of storylines that we have memorable standout events, like the Mutant Snow Goons, Camp Foxtrot, Garfield's Halloween, and the entirety of Flash Gordon, and therefore Star Wars. So BC still has a lot of potential that can be expanded upon from what already exists. With stronger characters and a more focused setting, I think that BC can really be turned into a comic that'll be remembered for ages to come. Whether that's the Stone Age or the post-apocalyptic age remains to be seen. I'm your comic strip critic, and I read the funny pages in the hope that someday they will be.